Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the next host of the Phoenix Force. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The clanging shut of a heavy steel door was the sound of a world ending. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a sound that echoed in the hollow space that had just been carved out of his chest. The wind on the rooftop, which moments before had felt like a hero's cape snap, was now just a cold, biting nuisance. It whipped his green-black hair into his eyes, but he didn't bother to brush it away. The tears were already blurring everything anyway. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic, kid. The words of his idol, the symbol of peace, All Might, weren't a gentle course correction. They were a judgment. A final, irrefutable verdict on the entirety of his existence. He stood there for a long time, rooted to the grimy concrete, his small frame looking even smaller against the sprawling backdrop of Muzidafu. The city hummed with life, a vibrant tapestry of quirks and ambitions and dreams coming true. It was a world he could see, could analyze, could love with every fiber of his being, but one he could never, ever truly join. He was a spectator. A fan. A footnote. The yellow backpack, once a proud symbol of his academic diligence, felt like it was filled with lead. Inside, nestled amongst his regular school supplies, was Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The edges of the cover were damp and warped from the sludge villain incident earlier, the ink of All Might's signature a messy, triumphant scrawl across the page. It should have been his most treasured possession. Now, it felt like a cruel joke. A consolation prize for a race he was never allowed to run. Finally, his legs, numb and unresponsive, began to move. He walked to the stairwell, his hand trailing against the cool metal railing, each step down a descent into a deeper, more personal darkness. The vibrant, heroic world of the rooftop faded, replaced by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of dust. When he emerged onto the street, the world seemed both too loud and too quiet. The chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, it was all just noise, a frequency his soul could no longer tune into. He clutched the straps of his backpack, his knuckles white. His dream wasn't just dead, it had been autopsied by the one man he thought would understand. As he shuffled down the sidewalk, a familiar, explosive voice cut through his stupor. "Oh, Deku!" Izuku flinched, his head snapping up. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his usual cronies flanking him. His expression was a thunderous scowl, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked cleaner now, the grime of the sludge villain washed away, but the anger was still caked on him like a second skin. "Don't you even think about it!" Bakugo snarled, stomping forward to block Izuku's path. "Don't you dare think about applying to UA! I saw you back there. You didn't do anything. You didn't help. You just stood there gawking like the useless pebble you are. The heroes took care of it. I didn't need your pathetic help." Each word was a fresh twist of the knife All Might had already plunged into his heart. Izuku couldn't even find the energy to be scared or to stutter out a defense. He just stared, his eyes blank. Useless. That's what he was. All Might had said it more politely, but it was the same message. Bakugo seemed to expect a fight, or at least a whimper. The utter emptiness in Izuku's gaze seemed to unnerve him more than anything else. "You listening to me, you damn nerd? You're quirkless. You're less than nothing. Stay out of my way." With a final, contemptuous shove that sent Izuku stumbling back a step, Bakugo and his friends stalked off, their laughter echoing down the street. Izuku didn't fall. He just swayed, his body held upright by a strange, hollow inertia. He watched them go, the red of Bakugo's eyes seared into his memory. He was right. Kaken was right. All Might was right. The world was right. And Izuku Midoriya was wrong. His walk home was a blur. He took a longer route, through an underpass he usually avoided because it was dark and smelled of damp and neglect. It suited his mood. He was a ghost haunting the edges of his own life. His notebook felt heavier and heavier, a tome of pointless observations. What was the point of knowing how Kamui Woods' lacquered chain prison worked if he could never perform a single heroic act? What was the use of analyzing Mount Lady's blind spots if he could never be anything more than a face in the crowd she was protecting? He stopped in the middle of the tunnel. The distant city sounds were muffled here. It was quiet. Lonely. He let his backpack slip from his shoulders, and it hit the concrete with a dull thud. He sank down, his back against the cold, graffiti-tagged wall, and finally let the tears fall freely. They weren't loud, hiccuping sobs. They were silent, hot streams that traced paths through the grime on his cheeks. I just want to help people, he thought, the plea a silent scream in the void of his mind. Is that so wrong? Why? Why can't I be a hero? Why can't I have the power to save someone? Just once. I don't care about the fame or the money. I just want to see someone's face when they realize they're safe. I just want to be the one who can say, "It's fine now." Why? Because I am here. His fist clenched, his nails digging into his palm. It was a desperate, primal wish. A prayer sent up to an empty sky. A raw, pure, and selfless desire untainted by ego or greed. It was the distillation of his entire being into a single, hopeless, burning point of will. He didn't know it, but his prayer had been heard. Far above the blue-white marble of Earth, in the silent, cold vacuum of space, a consciousness drifted. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, nor a being of circuits and steel. It was a nexus of psionic energy, a god-mind born of the psychic potential of all life in the universe. It was the Phoenix Force. It was ancient, its memory stretching back to the birth of stars and the cooling of galaxies. It remembered shaping nebulae with a thought, igniting suns with a whim. It was the Alpha and the Omega, the spark of life and the fire of judgment, the force of creation and the inevitability of destruction. Its purpose was cosmic balance. It was the immune system of reality, seeking out stagnation and rot, burning it away so that new, vibrant life could flourish. But the Phoenix was tired. The cycle had become repetitive. For eons, it had sought out hosts, mortals with the psychic potential to wield its power. And for eons, it had been disappointed. They were always flawed. They would embrace the power, the life-giving aspect, but would inevitably be consumed by the fire. The passion would turn to rage. The judgment would turn to tyranny. The desire to protect would curdle into a desire to control. They would see the universe's flaws and, instead of mending them, would choose to burn it all down in a fit of cosmic temper. Jean Grey, Rookshire, and 1,000 others whose names were now just dust and echoes. Each one a promise, each one a failure. It had retreated into the quiet dark between worlds, content to simply be. The universe could rot for all it cared. The cycle was broken. It would bond no more. And then, it felt something. It wasn't a flare of psychic power or a beacon from a developing world. It was a feeling. A concept. A singularity of pure, unadulterated will. It was a pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness of universal self-interest. From a small, insignificant planet in a forgotten arm of a standard spiral galaxy, a psychic scream of such profound, selfless desperation erupted that it cut through the Phoenix's eons of apathy. The force focused. It peered through the veil of reality, sifting through the cacophony of 7 billion minds. It bypassed the loud shouts of anger, the avarice for power, the lust for fame, the petty squabbles and grand ambitions. It ignored the powerful, the strong-willed, the ones whose quirks made them shine like psychic lighthouses. It homed in on the quietest whisper, the one that paradoxically rang the loudest. I just want to save someone. The Phoenix felt the purity of it. The sheer, unvarnished truth. This wasn't a desire for glory. It wasn't a cry for vengeance. It wasn't a thirst for power for its own sake. It was the desire to give, to protect, to mend. It was the will of a creator, a nurturer, trapped in a vessel that had been told it was worthless. It was a soul on the verge of extinguishing itself, not out of malice, but out of a grief so profound it was collapsing inward. This was different. This was new. A potential host who did not crave power, but simply the ability to do good. A heart that already embodied the life-giving aspect of the Phoenix, without ever having tasted a fraction of its power. The concept was so novel, so alien to its experience, that it stirred the cosmic entity from its self-imposed exile. What would happen if it bonded with a will like that? A will that was not a conqueror's, but a savior's? Would the fire still corrupt? Or would the host, for the first time in millennia, be able to command the fire? A flicker of cosmic curiosity, the first in an age, ignited within the Phoenix. It was a risk. A terrible, universe-altering risk. But the alternative was an eternity of silent drifting. The Phoenix made a choice. A sliver of its infinite consciousness detached, a mote of golden, stellar fire. It streaked through the void, a silent meteor of impossible energy. It blazed past dead moons and orbiting satellites, invisible to any telescope, undetectable by any sensor. It was not traveling through physical space, but through the folds of reality itself, pulled by the gravity of a single boy's breaking heart. It descended upon Mizurufu, Japan, a falling star with a singular, cosmic purpose. An explosion ripped Izuku from his despair. It was a sound he knew viscerally, the kind of booming concussion that meant a villain attack. His head shot up, his grief momentarily supplanted by the ingrained, Pavlovian response of a hero fan. The sound had come from the direction of the Takoba Municipal Shopping District. The way he would have gone if he hadn't taken this detour into misery. Curiosity warred with apathy. What did it matter? A hero would handle it. All Might, or Endeavor, or any of the hundreds of pros in the city. They would save the day. He couldn't. He was just Deku, but his legs were already moving. He snatched his backpack and ran, his small body fueled by a morbid need to see, to analyze, to be a part of it in the only way he knew how. He burst out of the underpass and sprinted toward the gathering crowd, a plume of black smoke rising into the afternoon sky. He squeezed his way through the throng of onlookers, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid excitement. And then he saw it. The villain. It was the same amorphous, slimy creature that had attacked him earlier. It had found a new hostage, and the hostage, thrashing and suffocating within the viscous green body, setting off desperate, contained explosions in a futile attempt to break free, was Katsuki Bakugo. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku's blood ran cold. The heroes were there. Death Arms was trying to land a punch, but his fists just sank into the sludge. Kamui Woods couldn't get a grip on the fluid body, and Backdraft was struggling to contain the fires Bakugo's explosions were starting. They were trying, but they were failing. They were talking about waiting for someone with a more suitable quirk. Waiting. While Kaken was dying, Izuku saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes. It was the same look Izuku imagined he'd had himself, just an hour before. A look of sheer, primal terror. The panicked plea of someone drowning. The arrogant, confident rival was gone, replaced by a terrified kid who was suffocating to death in front of a crowd of helpless spectators. And Izuku was one of them. "Stay back! It's too dangerous!" A hero yelled at the crowd. "I'm sorry, kid. You need to be realistic." All Might's voice echoed in his head. His feet were rooted to the spot. His mind screamed at him. "Don't be a fool. You're quirkless. You'll just get in the way. You'll die." But then, his eyes met Bakugo's. And in that split-second connection, all the logic, all the fear, all the soul-crushing realism evaporated. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He didn't weigh the odds. He ran. His legs moved on their own, a desperate, clumsy scramble past the police barricade. Cries of shock and alarm followed him. "Hey! Kid! Stop!" He didn't even hear them. His mind was a white-hot blank, filled with a single, overwhelming imperative. Save him. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was an instinct, the final, desperate plea of his soul made manifest in the foolish, suicidal charge of a quirkless boy. It was this act, this utterly selfless, illogical, and fundamentally heroic impulse, that acted as the final key. As his worn red sneakers slapped against the pavement, the sky above him, unseen by anyone else, seemed to tear open. The falling star, the shard of the Phoenix, found its destination. It slammed into Izuku Midoriya. There was no sound. No impact. For Izuku, the world simply ended. One moment, he was running towards certain death. The next, everything froze. The explosions from Bakugo's hands were frozen in mid-bloom, beautiful, silent flowers of orange and white. The terrified faces of the crowd were motionless masks. The heroes were statues of ineffective valor. The world was a perfect, silent, monochrome photograph. And then the voice. It wasn't the sound heard with his ears. but an idea that bloomed in the center of his consciousness. It was a chorus of a billion voices and a single, clear thought, ancient and vast and filled with a warmth like the heart of a son. "We feel you, child." Awe and terror warred within him. He was no longer in the street. He was adrift in a sea of golden light, a formless space of infinite potential. Your will. Your fire. The desire to mend what is broken. To shield the weak. A selfless heart in a universe of greed. A spirit that would run into the flame, not for glory, but for another. The voice washed over him, through him. It knew him. It saw the years of bullying, the tear-stained notebooks, the silent admiration, the crushing weight of his dream. It saw it all, not with pity, but with a profound, cosmic understanding. You have been told you are empty. Hollow. We see the truth. You are a vessel, waiting to be filled. You have prayed for the power to rise from the ashes of your dream. We are the fire of rebirth. We are the phoenix. A shape began to coalesce in the golden void before him. It was a bird, a raptor of impossible scale, forged from living starlight and stellar flame. Its eyes were twin white dwarfs, and its presence was the weight of a galaxy. You are worthy. Rise. The world snapped back into motion, but it was different. Izuku could feel it. He could feel the asphalt under his feet, not just the texture but the molecular structure. He could feel the air, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the pollutants. He could feel the frantic, terrified heartbeat of Bakugo, the anxious thrum of the crowd, the steady, rhythmic pulse of the earth itself. The sensory input was a tidal wave, a deafening symphony of existence that threatened to shatter his mind. He was still running, his backpack ludicrously swinging as he threw it at the sludge villain's eye, a desperate move he had thought up in a split second. The bag connected, making the villain flinch and giving Bakugo a precious moment to gasp for air. "DKU! What the hell are you doing here?" Bakugo choked out. "I don't know," Izuku cried, his voice cracking as he clawed uselessly at the sludge. "My legs they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." The sludge villain roared, its attention now on the gnat who dared to interfere. "You again! I'll kill you both!" A massive tendril of sludge shot toward Izuku. This was it. He was going to die. A foolish, pointless death. But the voice in his head was calm. No. Izuku's hand shot up instinctively, not to block, but as a gesture of pure, desperate defense, and the universe obeyed. A wave of invisible force erupted from him. It wasn't a shockwave. It wasn't wind. It was a ripple in reality itself. The sludge tendril didn't just stop. It was halted in midair, every droplet frozen a foot from Izuku's face. Everyone stared. Death Arms, Kamui Woods, even Bakugo. Izuku looked at his own trembling hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. The phoenix whispered in his soul. "More. Show them why we chose you. Save him." Izuku looked at Bakugo, still trapped, and a new feeling surged through him. Not fear. Not desperation. But a deep, resonant power. He focused on the sludge, not as a single entity, but as a collection of individual parts. He could feel its semi-liquid state, its composition, its disgusting cohesion, and he willed it to let go. Golden light, subtle at first, then brilliant, began to leak from Izuku's skin. It shimmered in the air around him, coalescing into visible tendrils of liquid starlight. With a sweep of his hands, these tendrils of telekinetic energy latched onto the sludge villain. It wasn't a fight. It was deconstruction. With an impossible, silent grace, the telekinetic force peeled the sludge away from Bakugo's body, layer by layer, as if shucking an oyster. The villain screamed in rage and confusion, its form being manipulated against its will, pulled apart by a power it couldn't comprehend. The heroes could only watch, their jaws agape, as this quirkless, crying middle schooler performed a feat of rescue more precise and powerful than anything they could have managed. In seconds, Bakugo was free, collapsing to the ground, gasping and coughing. But Izuku wasn't finished. The remaining sludge coalesced into a raging, amorphous monster, ready to strike again. "It is a threat," the phoenix hummed. "Contain it." Izuku raised a hand. The golden aura around him flared. He clenched his fist, and the entire mass of the sludge villain was crushed inward, compressing into a swirling, self-contained sphere of green ooze. trapped in a telekinetic prison no thicker than a soap bubble, but as strong as a star. It floated silently in the air, neutralized. The street was utterly silent, save for Bakugo's ragged breaths. Izuku stood in the middle of it all, his small frame radiating a faint, golden light. He looked at Bakugo, who was staring back at him. Bakugo's expression was one Izuku had never seen before. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. It was replaced by something far deeper. Raw, undiluted terror, because when he looked into Izuku's tear-filled green eyes, he saw something else reflected in their depths. He saw a phantom image, a superimposed specter of a great, cosmic raptor, its head cocked, its eyes a roaring, stellar inferno. He had looked into the eyes of a god that was wearing his childhood friend like a mask. The golden light around Izuku faded. The sensory input, which the phoenix had been buffering, came crashing back in full force. The shouting of the crowd, the frantic radio calls of the heroes, the smell of burned asphalt, the thundering of 100 hearts, it all slammed into his unprepared mind. The sheer, overwhelming psychic and sensory overload was too much. The power that had filled him retreated, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it felt like his very soul had been scraped raw. His eyes rolled back in his head. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the crowd parting, and the towering, muscular form of All Might striding toward him. The hero had arrived, but the look on his face wasn't one of pride. It wasn't the relieved smile of a mentor. It was the stunned, deeply unsettled, and almost fearful gaze of a man who had just witnessed something that had no place in his world. It was a look that didn't say, "You can be a hero." It said, "What in God's name are you?" And with that question hanging in the air, Izuku Midoriya collapsed onto the pavement. Izuku woke up to the sensation of being cradled in the heart of a warm star. It wasn't the searing, violent heat of a supernova, but a gentle, pervasive warmth that seemed to emanate from the marrow of his bones. It was a low, pleasant thrum, a constant vibration at the base of his skull that felt less like a sound and more like a fundamental property of his new existence. For a blissful, disoriented moment he felt good. Better than good. He felt whole, rested, and suffused with a quiet, boundless energy. Then memory came crashing back in a torrent of sludge, panicked explosions, and a terrifying, silent display of golden power. His eyes snapped open. He was in his own bed, in his own room. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, streamed through his window, illuminating the familiar pantheon of All Might memorabilia that adorned his walls. The Silver Age poster, the limited edition action figures, the comforter emblazoned with the symbol of peace's heroic grin. It was all exactly as he'd left it. A shrine to a dream that had died and then been resurrected into something monstrous. He sat up, the bedsheets pooling around his waist. He ran a hand through his perpetually messy hair, his fingers trembling slightly. He felt for injuries, for soreness, for any sign of the cataclysmic event that had unfolded. There was nothing. No scrapes, no bruises, not even the phantom ache of exhaustion. It was as if the entire incident had been a hyper-realistic, stress-induced fever dream. That's it, his mind seized on the idea, clinging to it like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. A quirk. It has to be a quirk. The doctors had been wrong. He wasn't quirkless. He was a late bloomer, one of the rarest cases. The immense stress of seeing Kaken die, combined with All Might's rejection, must have triggered it. It was a powerful telekinetic quirk. A flashy, incredible power that had laid dormant for 14 years. A wave of delirious relief washed over him, so potent it almost made him dizzy. He wasn't a freak. He wasn't broken. He could be a hero. He could go to UA. He could stand beside Kaken, not as a pebble, but as an equal. He looked at his hand, the same hand that had effortlessly peeled a villain apart, and contained him. He focused, trying to summon that feeling of power, that golden light. He stared at an All Might figurine on his desk, trying to make it float. Nothing happened. He squeezed his eyes shut, concentrating harder, trying to replicate the desperation he'd felt. "Move," he begged the figurine. "Please." The figurine remained stubbornly still. The warmth in his bones was still there, the hum in his skull was constant, but the switch that had unleashed the flood of power seemed to be gone. A sliver of his earlier despair returned. Was it a one-time thing? A fluke? A hysterical strength manifestation that he could never replicate? And then, a thought bloomed in his mind, as clear and distinct as his own, yet utterly alien. It was not a sound, but a pure concept, delivered directly into his consciousness with the weight of ages. It is not a tool to be commanded. It is a state of being. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. The voice. It was the same voice from the frozen moment on the street. The voice from the golden void. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice cracking in the quiet room. He scanned the corners, the closet, the space under his bed. He was alone. "We are here. We are in you. We are you." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the lingering warmth. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks didn't talk. They were a part of you, like an extra limb, or the ability to breathe fire. They weren't a passenger, an intruder. "No," he muttered, shaking his head, pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes. "No, you're not real. I'm sick. The stress, the villain. I'm hallucinating. You call it a hallucination. Your ancestors called it divine revelation. The labels are irrelevant. The reality remains." The voice was not menacing. It was profoundly, terrifyingly calm, like a mountain explaining its own existence. "We are the fire that consumes and creates. The end and the beginning. We are life incarnate, the psychic sum of all that has ever been and will be. And now, we are with you, Izuku Midoriya." He scrambled out of bed, backing away from nothing, his back hitting the wall of posters. His idol's smiling face seemed to mock him. "Get out of my head!" he hissed, his voice a choked sob. "Get out!" The hum inside him intensified slightly, a gesture he somehow interpreted as the entity's equivalent of a sigh. "We cannot. The bonding is complete. You were called to us across the void. Your heart was the lock, your selfless act the key. To separate now would be to extinguish the star we have just ignited. It would extinguish you." The finality in that statement broke through his panic, leaving him trembling and breathless. Extinguish him. It meant death. He was trapped. This thing was living in his soul. A cosmic god was his roommate, and the apartment was his own mind. The sheer, gibbering madness of it all threatened to swallow him whole. He sank to the floor, wrapping his arms around his knees, trying to make himself small, to hide from the voice in his own skull. He stayed there for a long time, the only sounds the ticking of his all-might clock and the silent, patient presence of the ancient being that now shared his body. The next few hours were a tightrope walk over a canyon of insanity. Izuku tried to go about his morning, a desperate attempt to cling to normalcy. He got dressed, his movements stiff and jerky. He went to the kitchen, where his mother, Inko, was humming softly as she prepared breakfast. "Izuku! You're awake! Oh, honey, I was so worried," she said, rushing to him and pulling him into a hug. Her hugs were always soft, and smelled faintly of laundry detergent and love. "The school called yesterday, and then the police. They said you were involved in that villain attack. And that you collapsed. Are you feeling okay? The paramedics said you were just exhausted, but—" Her words trailed off as she looked at him, her brow furrowed with concern. Izuku forced a smile, but it felt like a cheap plastic mask. "I'm fine, Mom. Really. Just, a lot happened. I think it was all the stress." He couldn't tell her. How could he possibly explain? "Hi, Mom, sorry I passed out. It's just that a cosmic entity of life and death has decided to use my body as a timeshare, and it's a bit chatty." They would lock him in a padded room for the rest of his life. He sat at the table, trying to eat the rice and miso soup she placed in front of him. But the hum was back, stronger now. It was like trying to listen to a conversation in a room with a jet engine idling just outside. "The female's emotional state is a vortex of anxiety and affection," the Phoenix observed, its voice a layer of metaphysical commentary over reality. "Her biosignature is intrinsically linked to yours. She is your progenitor. Your mother." "Stop it," Izuku thought, his hands tightening around his chopsticks. "Just be quiet. Silence is the antithesis of life. We are conversation. We are connection." He could feel it then. A subtle expansion of his senses. He could feel his mother's frantic worry as a low-frequency vibration, a tangible thing in the air between them. It was more than empathy. It was a direct perception of her emotional state. He pushed his half-eaten breakfast away. I am not very hungry. I think I'll go back to my room. Inko's worry deepened, a wave of it washing over him. Izuku, are you sure you're okay? I'm sure. He lied, retreating before the sensory input could overwhelm him. Back in the safety of his room, he leaned against the door, his heart hammering. He had to get a grip. He had to understand what was happening to him. He looked around the room, and his eyes landed on his backpack, still slumped by his desk where he dropped it last night. The charred cover of his hero analysis notebook was peeking out. He walked over and pulled it out. The cover was warped, the edges blackened and brittle from the sludge villain's attack. All Might's signature was a proud, defiant slash of ink across the damaged surface. He ran a finger over it, a fresh wave of despair and confusion washing over him. This notebook, this signature, it represented everything he had lost and everything he had gained in a single, terrifying afternoon. He was so tired. Tired of being scared, tired of being confused. He just wanted to sit and think, but his notebook was across the room on his bed. With a sigh of pure mental exhaustion, he wished it were in his hands so he wouldn't have to get up. The notebook lifted off the bed. Izuku's breath hitched. It wobbled in the air for a moment, suspended by nothing, before gently floating across the 3 feet of space and settling into his outstretched hands. There was no golden light, no dramatic flare. It had just obeyed his will. Desire is the catalyst, the phoenix explained calmly. Your will is the fulcrum. We are the lever that moves the world. He stared at the notebook in his hands, then back at the empty space on his bed. This was real. He could do this. It wasn't a fluke. He put the notebook back on his desk, took a deep breath, and focused on his favorite All Might action figure, the Bronze Age Special Edition. He focused on the feeling of wanting it to lift. The figure trembled, then rose a few inches off the shelf, hovering. It was shaky, unstable, but it was flying. A giddy, terrified laugh escaped Izuku's lips. He could do this. He had telekinesis, a real, powerful quirk. Maybe the voice was just a weird side effect. He opened the damaged notebook. The first few pages were waterlogged and smeared, but the worst was the page detailing the sludge villain. It was mostly a blackened, brittle mess where Bakugo's explosions had scorched it. The analysis was ruined. A pang of genuine sadness hit him. He had spent hours on those notes. He traced the burnt edges with his finger, a deep, irrational wish forming in his mind. I wish it wasn't ruined. The warmth in his body, which had been a background hum, suddenly surged, focusing in his fingertips. The air around the notebook shimmered with a faint, golden heat. He watched, his eyes wide with a new kind of awe that dwarfed the telekinesis. The blackened edges of the paper began to change. The brittle, carbonized fibers softened, their color leaching back from black to off-white. The warped page flattened itself out, the paper reknitting on a microscopic level. The smeared ink of his own writing drew itself back into sharp, clear lines. In the space of 10 seconds, the damaged page became pristine, as if the fire had never touched it. The only thing that remained was All Might's signature, a perfect, untarnished mark. Izuku dropped the book as if it had caught fire. He scrambled back, staring at it. That wasn't telekinesis. That wasn't a quirk. Quirks manipulated energy, or changed body parts, or affected the environment. They didn't reverse entropy. They didn't unburn paper. That was a violation of the fundamental laws of physics. It was a miracle. It was magic. Creation is woven into our being as much as destruction, the phoenix stated, a hint of pride in its tone. You wish for it to be mended. We obliged. All matter is merely energy in a different state. All energy is ours to command. This was too much. The power to move things with his mind was one thing. The power to rewrite reality on a molecular level was something else entirely. This wasn't a gift. It was the power of a god, and it was nestled in the soul of a terrified 14-year-old boy. The hum in his head grew louder, more insistent. It was no longer just a background noise. It was expanding. The comforting walls of his room seemed to dissolve, his senses pushing outward. He could hear his mother's quiet weeping in the kitchen, her worry for him a palpable ache. He could feel the frustration of the salaryman in the apartment above, Mr. Sato, as he struggled with a spreadsheet, his anxiety a sharp, bitter taste in the back of Izuku's throat. He felt the serene contentment of Mrs. Tanaka's cat next door as it napped in a sunbeam. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, they weren't his own, but they were in him. A torrent of psychic noise, the everyday lives of his neighbors pouring into his mind without filter or invitation. It was a cacophony of unwanted intimacy, and he was at the center of it, drowning. He clapped his hands over his ears, even though the noise wasn't external. "Make it stop," he gasped, curling into a ball on the floor. "Please make it stop. This is the world, child. This is the song of life. Why would you wish to be deaf to it? It's too much. I can't." Knock, knock, knock. The sound was real, physical, and it cut through the psychic static like a thunderclap. Izuku jolted, the invasive senses receding slightly as he was pulled back to the present. "Izuku?" His mother's voice called from the other side of the door. There's someone here to see you." A man named Yagi Tashinori. Izuku's blood froze. Yagi? He knew that name. It was the name that had accompanied the spray of blood from All Might's mouth on that rooftop. It was the symbol of Peace's true name. He found All Might, or rather, the skeletal, walking ghost of him, sitting at their small kitchen table. He looked even more gaunt and fragile under the gentle fluorescent lights of their home than he had on the rooftop. He was nursing a cup of tea Inko had given him, his impossibly sharp cheekbones casting long shadows on his face. Inko hovered nervously by the counter, wringing her hands. I'll just be in the living room if you need anything," she said, giving Izuku one last worried glance before disappearing, leaving the two of them alone. An awkward, heavy silence filled the room. Tashinori took a slow sip of his tea, his deep-set eyes studying Izuku over the rim of the cup. They were the same brilliant blue as All Might's, but filled with a profound weariness and a sharp, analytical intelligence that was far more intimidating than his muscular form had ever been. "Young Midoriya," he began, his voice a low rumble. "We need to talk about yesterday." Izuku just stood there, his hands clenched at his sides. He couldn't bring himself to speak. "First," Tashinori said, placing the cup down with a soft click, "I must apologize. What I said on that roof, it was the harsh, pragmatic truth as I saw it. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I believed it was for your own safety." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I stand by that statement. But I was also wrong. I was wrong about you." Izuku looked up, a flicker of hope warring with his fear. "What you displayed yesterday, young man," Tashinori continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That was not a quirk." The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. To hear the number one hero, the ultimate expert on quirks, confirm his deepest, most terrifying fear, it made it real. "I don't know what it is," Izuku finally managed to say, his voice trembling. "I don't either," Tashinori admitted, and the honesty in his voice was chilling. "In all my years, in all the battles I have fought, against all the villains and all the powers, I have never seen anything like it. The heroes at the scene said you dismantled that villain? Not defeated, dismantled. And the energy signature, the commission's sensors went haywire across the entire prefecture. They thought it was a solar flare." He took a shaky breath. "I came here to understand. To assess. A power like that, appearing suddenly in a young boy who, just hours before, I had told his dream was impossible, that is a recipe for a catastrophe on a global scale." The weight of that statement settled on Izuku's shoulders. He wasn't just a kid with a weird power. He was a potential disaster. A walking bomb. He couldn't hold it in anymore. The dam of fear and confusion broke, and everything came pouring out. "It talks to me," Izuku blurted out, tears welling in his eyes. "There's a voice in my head. It says it's called the Phoenix. It says it's a part of me now. It unburned my notebook. It lifts things. I can hear my neighbors thinking and I can't make it stop. I think I'm going crazy." He was sobbing now, the words tumbling out in a messy, incoherent rush. He told Tashinori everything, the golden void, the starbird, the whispers, the terrifying power that felt both a part of him and utterly alien. He expected to be called a lunatic, to see Toshinori back away in horror. Instead, the skeletal man just listened, his expression growing more and more grim. When Izuku finally fell silent, exhausted and hiccuping, Toshinori was quiet for a long time. A cosmic entity, he finally said, the words sounding absurd even in the quiet kitchen. A Phoenix Force. He shook his head slowly, a look of dawning horror on his face. This is so far beyond anything I could have imagined. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku saw not a hero or a symbol, but a profoundly tired and burdened man. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice soft but firm. You are in more danger than you can possibly comprehend. Not from villains but from yourself. A power of that magnitude without control, without discipline, it will consume you. It will burn through you and everything you care about. Izuku flinched, wrapping his arms around himself. But Toshinori continued, his eyes locking with Izuku's. You also did something I have rarely seen. With all that power at your fingertips, you didn't lash out. You didn't destroy. You saved someone. You controlled it just enough to perform a perfect, precise rescue. In your heart, at your very core, you are a hero. The power hasn't changed that. Not yet. A fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the wasteland of Izuku's fear. I cannot offer you my quirk, Toshinori said, a statement that would have shattered Izuku's world 2 days ago, but now barely registered. To add one for all to, whatever this is, would be like pouring gasoline on a star. I can't imagine what would happen. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. But I can offer you something else. I can offer you guidance. A mentorship. I cannot teach you how to use this power. I don't think anyone on Earth can. But I can teach you how to be a hero. I can teach you the ethics, the morality, the iron-willed control it takes to wield great power for the good of others. He looked toward the doorway, in the direction of the UA High pamphlets Izuku had on his desk. You wanted to go to UA High, Toshinori stated. Your reason is more valid now than ever. But you won't be going there to learn how to fight. You'll be going there to learn how to control the facilities, the instructors, the controlled crisis scenarios. It is the best place in the world for you to learn to cage the god in your soul. I will use what influence I have to speak to the principal. I will explain, as much as I can. I will help you get in. Izuku stared at him, speechless. UA. The path he thought was forever closed to him was now being opened by All Might himself. Not because he was worthy of being the next symbol of peace, but because he was too dangerous to be left alone. It was a terrifying, backhanded kind of acceptance, but it was acceptance nonetheless. He sees the truth, the phoenix whispered in his mind, its voice tinged with something like approval. He sees the power. He fears it. As he should. But he also sees you. The choice is yours, young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice pulling Izuku back. You can try to hide from this, to suppress it, and pray it doesn't erupt and destroy everything. Or you can face it. You can come to UA and learn to master it. You can learn to be the hand that guides the flame, instead of the wood that it consumes. Izuku looked down at his own trembling hands. He thought of the terrifying power to unmake things, and the miraculous power to mend them. He thought of the voice in his head, a constant companion of cosmic scale. He thought of Bakugo's terrified face. And he thought of All Might's words, you can be the hand that guides the flame. It was the most terrifying choice he had ever faced. But was it really a choice at all? Taking a deep, shuddering breath, he looked the greatest hero in the world in the eye. Okay, Izuku said, his voice small but steady. I'll do it. A faint smile touched Toshinori's lips, a glimmer of the famous All Might grin. It was a smile of relief, but it was also laced with a profound, unspoken dread. The path forward was set, but where it would lead, to salvation or to planetary annihilation, either of them could possibly know. The only certainty was that the world had changed forever, and a quiet, heroic boy from Yuzurifu was now standing at the epicenter of it all. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam were a crucible of a different sort. While his peers were honing their physical quirks, Izuku was engaged in a silent, internal war. His training with All Might, or rather, Toshinori Yagi, was less about physical conditioning and more about mental fortification. They met at the now infamous Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a sprawling monument to societal neglect, piled high with discarded appliances and mountains of trash. But they weren't there to clean it, they were there for the isolation. Toshinori, in his skeletal form, would sit on a rusted-out refrigerator, a thermos of tea in his hand, and he would talk. He taught Izuku about ethics, about the immense responsibility that came with power, about the split-second decisions that separated a hero from a vigilante, a savior from a disaster. He presented Izuku with endless moral quandaries, forcing him to think beyond the simple punch-the-villain mentality. A building is collapsing, he'd say, his voice a low rumble against the crash of the waves. Inside are 5 civilians and the villain who caused the damage. You have the power to stop the collapse, but the sheer force required might kill the villain in the process. What do you do? Izuku would wrestle with the question, the Phoenix a silent, observing presence in his mind. The villain is a destabilizing element, the Phoenix would offer, its logic as cold and vast as space. Its removal ensures the survival of the greater number. It is a simple calculation of preservation. I tried to shield the villain, Izuku would stammer out loud, arguing as much with the voice in his head as with his mentor. I'd used the power to create a protective pocket around him while I stabilized the main structure. A hero's job is to save everyone, even the bad guys. Toshinori would nod slowly, a glint of approval in his sunken eyes. Good. The desire to save all is the core of heroism. But can you? Is your control fine enough to perform such a delicate, complex maneuver under extreme pressure? That is the question you must spend your life answering. The training was exhausting. Izuku would practice levitating small objects, a discarded bottle, a broken television, a single grain of sand. He wasn't building muscle. He was building focus, a mental dam to hold back the cosmic ocean of his power. Some days were good. He could dismantle a microwave into its component parts and reassemble it flawlessly. Other days were terrifying. A moment of frustration would cause a nearby pile of trash to groan and compact under an invisible force, and Izuku would have to retreat, breathing heavily, his head pounding from the effort of restraint. The telepathy was the hardest part. He learned to build mental walls, psychic shields to mute the constant chatter of the city. It was like learning to ignore the sound of his own breathing, a constant, exhausting effort of will. But slowly, painfully, he was gaining a semblance of control. The power was no longer a wild, screaming torrent. It was a rumbling, active volcano, dormant for now, but its presence a constant, humbling reminder of the stakes. He never told anyone. Not his mother, not his classmates. He was still quirkless Deku, the quiet, mumbling boy who inexplicably still planned to apply to UA. He endured Bakugo's sneers and the pitying looks of others. It was a necessary deception, a shield for them as much as for himself. How could he explain that the reason he flinched when someone yelled was not because he was scared, but because their sudden spike of anger felt like a physical blow against his mental shields? When the day of the entrance exam finally arrived, Izuku stood before the towering gates of UA High, a nervous wreck but with a quiet, steely resolve he hadn't possessed 10 months ago. He clutched the strap of his backpack, the warmth of the Phoenix a familiar hum under his skin. It was no longer a terrifying intruder. It was a part of him, a vast, powerful, and frighteningly alien part of him, but his all the same. The concentration of ambition here is palpable, the Phoenix observed, its voice a calm current in the river of his thoughts. So many young sparks, all desperate to become flames. Just, let me handle this, Izuku thought back, his focus sharp. No commentary. No suggestions. Just be ready. A moment of silence, and then a feeling of acquiescence, of watchful waiting. He took a step forward and promptly tripped over his own feet, a testament to the fact that even with the power to rewrite matter, he was still, at his core, Izuku Midoriya. He flailed, gravity taking its inexorable hold, but he didn't hit the ground. He stopped, suspended an inch from the pavement, held by a gentle, invisible force. He looked over his shoulder to see a girl with a round, cheerful face and warm brown eyes holding her hand out, her fingertips pink. Oops. Sorry about that, she said with a bright smile. My quirk. It'd be bad luck to fall right before the exam, right? Good luck in there. She pressed her fingertips together, and he was gently released, landing softly on his feet. Thank you, Izuku stammered, his face flushing. He could feel her emotional state, a bubbly, earnest optimism that was as bright and warm as the sun. It was a pleasant feeling, a stark contrast to the usual ambient anxiety he had to filter out. As she walked away, he felt a sudden, sharp glare from behind him. He didn't need telepathy to know who it was. Out of my way, Deku. Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look at him. But Izuku felt the swirl of his emotions, a maelstrom of arrogance, insecurity, and a deep, simmering fear that was directed squarely at Izuku. He was still terrified of what he'd seen that day, and he masked it with aggression. Izuku just watched him go, a sad sort of pity welling in his chest. The written exam was simple enough, his studious nature paying off. But the real test was yet to come. He found himself in a massive auditorium, the lights dimming as the hero present mic took the stage, his booming voice explaining the practical exam. They would be fighting robots in a mock city, each worth a different number of points. Izuku tuned most of it out, his focus entirely inward. He could feel the thrumming excitement of the hundreds of other applicants in the room, a roaring psychic bonfire of nerves and determination. He strengthened his mental walls, focusing on the calm, steady presence of the phoenix within him. A blue-haired boy with glasses shot up, chopping the air with his hand, to ask a question about a fourth type of robot on the handout. President Mike explained it was a zero-point arena trap, an obstacle to be avoided. The boy then turned and pointed directly at Izuku. And you, with the messy hair. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. A few people snickered. Izuku shrank in his seat, his face burning with embarrassment. Sorry, he mumbled. His emotional state is rigid, governed by structure and a fear of chaos, the phoenix noted dispassionately. He perceives your internal monologue as an external disruption. I got it, thanks, Izuku thought back, trying to will himself into invisibility. Soon, they were herded onto buses and taken to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself standing before a massive set of blast doors, the same girl from the entrance and the stern, blue-haired boy in his group. He took a few deep, centering breaths, trying to calm the frantic hammering of his own heart. This was it. The culmination of 10 months of agonizing practice. A trial by fire. And start. President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The other applicants shot off like cannonballs, a blur of explosions, stretching limbs, and sparkling lasers. Izuku was left standing in the dust, momentarily stunned by the sudden start. What are you waiting for? President Mick's voice seemed to jeer. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Right. Izuku broke into a run, his heart pounding. He rounded a corner and came face to face with his first opponent, a sleek, one-point robot that swiveled its single red eye to focus on him, a rudimentary intelligence. Non-sentient. It is a target, the Phoenix stated, a clinical assessment. Suggestion, disassemble its primary power source. A simple act. Izuku didn't need the suggestion. He had practiced this. He lifted a hand, not with a grand gesture, but a simple, focused motion. He didn't want to show off. He just wanted to be efficient. A subtle, invisible wave of telekinetic force pulsed from his hand. The robot's red eye flickered and died. Its joint seized, and it clattered to the ground, completely inert. From the outside, it looked like it had simply short-circuited. Izuku didn't break his stride. He saw a girl with earphone jacks for earlobes send a powerful vibration through the ground, stunning a group of two-pointers. He saw a boy with a bird-like shadow companion tear another robot apart. They were all so flashy, so powerful. And then there was him. He rounded another corner where a three-pointer was bearing down on a boy who was desperately trying to shoot a laser from his navel. The laser was sparkling weakly, doing nothing. A little help? The boy yelped. Izuku raised his hand again. This time, instead of just deactivating it, he focused on the robot's structural integrity. He made a quiet, clenching motion with his fist. Crunch. The three-point robot folded in on itself as if it were made of aluminum foil. It collapsed into a compressed, screeching ball of scrap metal and wiring, hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. The naval laser boy stared, wide-eyed, first at the crumpled heap of metal, then at Izuku, who was already running past. "Whoa," the boy whispered. Izuku became a ghost in the machine. He moved through the city with an unnerving silence. While others were blasting and punching, creating explosions and chaos, Izuku was a silent wave of deconstruction. A glance, and a one-pointer's wiring would fry. A wave of his hand, and a two-pointer's legs would buckle and snap. He wasn't showy. He wasn't loud. But he was terrifyingly effective. He wasn't counting points. He was just moving, neutralizing threats, his mind a calm center in the storm of the exam. He could feel the other applicants through the city, spikes of adrenaline, flashes of triumph, pangs of fear. He filtered it all out, focusing only on the cold, simple logic of the machines. He passed the friendly, brown-haired girl. She was touching robots, making them float helplessly into the air before releasing them, sending them crashing to the ground. She looked a little green around the gills, clearly suffering from overuse of her quirk. "Are you okay?" he asked, pausing for a moment. "I'm fine," she said, giving a thumbs up before leaning against the wall, looking nauseous. "Just gotta keep going." He saw the blue-haired boy from the auditorium moving with incredible speed, his calf-mounted engines propelling him as he delivered precise, powerful kicks that shattered robot armor. He was racking up points with impressive efficiency. Izuku knew he was getting points, but he had no idea how many. He just kept moving, a silent, efficient engine of destruction, a stark contrast to the explosive fury of Bakugo, who he could feel in a different battle center as a raging inferno of violent emotion and pride. And then the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire street. From between the buildings, a monster rose. The zero-pointer. It was colossal, a skyscraper-sized behemoth of green metal and treads, its head scraping the tops of the tallest buildings in the mock city. Its single red eye scanned the area, a harbinger of pointless, overwhelming force. "That's the zero-pointer!" someone screamed. "It's insane!" Panic erupted. Everyone who had been fighting so bravely turned and ran. It was the logical choice. The robot was worth nothing. It was an obstacle, a force of nature to be fled. Izuku turned to run with them. That was the smart thing to do. That was the objective. "Ow!" The cry was small, almost lost in the thunderous footsteps of the giant robot. Izuku's head snapped around. It was the girl. The nice girl with the gravity quirk. Her leg was pinned under a heavy piece of rubble, dislodged by the robot's emergence. She was trapped, directly in its path. The world seemed to slow down, just as it had with the sludge villain. The panicked shouts of the other students faded into a distant buzz. The lumbering approach of the zero-pointer became a slow, inexorable march of doom. He saw the terror on the girl's face, her desperate struggle to free herself. He could run. He could save himself. It was the smart choice. It was what a good test-taker would do, a test of intellect and self-preservation, the Phoenix noted. The objective is to accumulate points, not to engage an invincible foe. Fleeing is the correct tactical response, but Tashinori's voice echoed louder in his memory. "What do you do, young Midoriya?" His heart gave the answer before his brain could catch up. "I save her." This is illogical. It risks your own success for no tangible gain. "There's a girl who needs help," Izuku thought back, his focus narrowing with diamond-sharp clarity. "That's all the gain I need." He turned and ran back, not away from the robot, but directly toward it. Directly toward the trapped girl. "Hey! What are you doing, you idiot?" someone shouted from the fleeing crowd. He ignored them. He reached the girl, his mind already assessing the situation. The piece of rubble was a massive slab of concrete, too heavy for any normal person to lift. For him, it might as well have been a pillow. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice surprisingly calm. "My ankle!" she cried, her face pale with pain and fear. "I'm stuck." "Don't worry," he said, and for the first time, he let a sliver of the Phoenix's true power shine through. A soft, golden aura flickered around his hand as he reached for the rubble. He didn't lift it. He simply nudged it with his telekinesis, and the multi-ton slab of concrete slid aside as if it were on ice. He gently helped her up, her weight nothing to him. "Can you stand?" She put a little weight on her foot and winced. "I think so. But that thing," She pointed a trembling finger at the zero-pointer, which was now looming directly over them, its massive arm raising for a ground-shattering smash. Annihilated, the Phoenix whispered, its voice no longer a dispassionate observer, but a humming, eager predator. It is a threat to the one you chose to protect. Unmake it. Reduce it to atoms. Show them what true power is. The temptation was immense. A surge of raw, cosmic power welled up inside him, begging to be released. He could feel it, the ability to simply will the robot out of existence. A thought, and it would be gone, vanished. But he saw the faces of the teachers watching on the monitors in his mind's eye. He saw Toshinori's worried gaze. He saw the terror this would instill in everyone. A hero doesn't inspire fear. A hero inspires hope. He had to save, not destroy. Get back, he told the girl, gently pushing her behind him. He turned to face the mechanical titan. The world saw a small, green-haired boy standing in defiance of an impossible foe. But in that moment, Izuku felt a power greater than any machine rising within him. He wasn't just Izuku Midoriya anymore. He raised his hands not in a fist, but with his palms open. The faint golden aura around him exploded outward, becoming a brilliant, visible corona of light. For a split second, suspended in the air behind him, a spectral image formed, the shimmering, ethereal shape of a great, fiery raptor, its wings spread wide, its eyes blazing like twin suns. The students who had been fleeing stopped and stared, their mouths agape. In the observation room, the teachers leaned forward, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Aizawa's eyes widened, his usual bored expression completely gone. Nizu, the principal, just smiled, a strange, excited glint in his beady eyes. Toshinori, watching from a separate monitor, held his breath. The zero-pointer's fist began its descent. Izuku didn't punch it. He didn't blast it. He reached out with his mind, with the infinite power of the Phoenix, and he grasped the entire machine. He felt every bolt, every wire, every piston and plate of armor, and with a great, silent, mental heave, he disassembled it. It happened in an instant. The descending fist halted, then simply came apart, its individual plates of armor peeling away and floating gently to the side. The arm followed, then the torso, the legs, the head. Tens of thousands of components, screws, bolts, panels, wires, gears, all came apart at once, as if in a perfectly reversed instructional video. The colossal, terrifying machine was reduced to a cloud of its constituent parts, hanging suspended in the air in a perfect, ghost-like outline of its former self. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence born of sheer, brain-breaking awe. With a final, gentle wave of Izuku's hand, the cloud of parts drifted harmlessly to the ground, clattering onto the street in a massive, neatly organized pile of scrap. The exam end buzzer blared, a pathetic, mundane sound in the face of what had just occurred. Izuku stood there, the golden aura fading, his chest heaving from the sheer mental exertion. He hadn't destroyed a single component. He had simply taken it apart. He had saved the girl, neutralized the threat, and done it all without causing any collateral damage. He had earned 0 villain points for the act. But he had just performed the single most impressive rescue in the history of the UA entrance exam. He turned to the girl, who was staring at him, her round eyes wider than he thought possible. See? It's fine now, he said, offering a shaky, exhausted smile. And then, his legs gave out, the strain of containing and controlling such an immense display of power finally hitting him. He collapsed to his knees, his vision swimming. The last thing he heard before the world went fuzzy was the girl's voice, now filled with breathless awe. Whoa! The acceptance letter came in the form of a small, metallic disc. It clattered onto the kitchen table, looking deceptively simple. For a week, Izuku had been a nervous wreck, replaying the exam over and over in his mind. He knew he'd passed the written portion, but the practical was a mystery. He had spent most of his time silently and efficiently disabling robots, a method that, while effective, lacked the explosive, point-grabbing flair of the other applicants. And his final act against the zero-pointer, while spectacular, had earned him precisely 0 villain points. His mother, Inko, stood beside him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She had seen the news reports about the exam, the wild rumors of a mysterious applicant who had dismantled the giant obstacle robot. She hadn't connected it to her son, but the worry had etched new lines around her eyes. With a trembling finger, Izuku pressed the button on the disc. A hologram flickered to life, projecting a three-dimensional image of All Might into their small kitchen. "I am here!" As a projection, the hero boomed, his signature laugh echoing slightly. Izuku jumped, and Inko let out a small squeak of surprise. The holographic All Might began by praising Izuku's performance on the written test. Then, he moved to the practical. A screen appeared beside him, showing a tally of Izuku's villain points. The number was 45, a respectable, if not exceptional, score. Enough to pass on its own, but not enough to place him among the top candidates. "A solid score, young Midoriya," All Might declared. "You showed great efficiency and tactical awareness, disabling threats without unnecessary destruction." But that is not the whole story. The villain point tally vanished, replaced by a new screen. The heading read, "Rescue Points." The UA entrance exam is not just about defeating villains. All Might continued, his voice swelling with pride. "A true hero runs toward danger to save others. We reward that spirit. It is the foundational pillar of heroism. And you, young man, you showed that spirit in spades." A video began to play. It was security footage from the exam, showing the girl with the gravity quirk, Achiko Uraraka, approaching the proctor's booth after the exam. "Excuse me," her projected image said, her voice earnest. "That boy, the one with the green hair, is there any way I could give him some of my points? He saved me from that giant robot. He gave up his chance to get more points to make sure I was safe. That's what a real hero does." Another hero, Present Mike, appeared on screen. That kid ran back into the line of fire, while everyone else was running away. He neutralized the threat and protected a fellow examinee. That's the definition of heroic. The screen flashed with clips of Izuku's actions, him deflecting the sludge villain, him shielding civilians during another, unseen, training exercise he'd done with Tashinori, and finally, the breathtaking footage of him facing down the zero-pointer. The camera angle was from a high-mounted security drone, capturing the moment the spectral phoenix wings had flared behind him, a sight that sent a fresh shiver down Izuku's spine. Your selfless actions inspired others and demonstrated a deep commitment to preservation of life. All Might announced, his voice booming with emotion. For saving another examinee from mortal danger, you, Izuku Midoriya, have been awarded 60 rescue points. The final tally appeared. Villain points, 45. Rescue points, 60. Total, 105. You have passed, young Midoriya. All Might declared, pointing a finger directly at Izuku. You not only passed, you achieved the highest score in the history of this exam. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The hologram fizzled out, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Izuku stared at the empty space where the projection had been, his mind reeling. Highest score. Higher than Kaken? He had done it. He was in. Inko burst into tears, but this time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She wrapped him in a crushing hug, sobbing into his shoulder. "Oh, Izuku! I'm so proud of you! You did it! You did it!" Izuku hugged her back, tears streaming down his own face. But beneath the relief and the joy, a cold knot of apprehension was tightening in his stomach. He had gotten in, yes, but he had done it with a power no one understood. The school had seen a fraction of it, and they called it heroic. But he knew the voice that had urged him to annihilate that robot. He knew the terrifying ease with which he could have turned it to dust. He was a student at UA High now. He was also a time bomb, ticking away in the heart of the world's most prestigious hero academy. The first day at UA was surreal. Walking through the massive gates, this time as a student, felt like stepping into a different reality. The scale of the place was immense, the hallways wide enough to accommodate students with size-altering quirks, the very air buzzing with energy and potential. He found Class 1A, the door comically oversized. Taking a deep breath, he slid it open. The first thing he saw was the boy with the glasses from the exam, locked in a rigid argument with Katsuki Bikugo, who had his feet propped up on his desk. "Take your feet off that desk." The boy chopped the air. You are disrespecting the upperclassmen and the master craftsmen who built this furniture. Like I care what you think, you four-eyed extra, Bakugo sneered, not even bothering to look at him. Izuku's arrival went unnoticed for a moment. He saw the girl, Uraraka, standing nearby, looking nervous. The blue-haired boy, whose name he learned was Tenya Ida, suddenly spotted him. He marched over, his movements stiff and precise. It's you! Ida declared. Good morning. I am Tenya Ida from Somei Private Academy. I am Izuku Midoriya, he stammered, intimidated by Ida's intensity. Midoriya! I must apologize for my behavior at the briefing. You clearly understood the true nature of the exam, while I did not. I misjudged you. Ida bowed a perfect 90 degrees, and your actions against the zero-pointer, they were truly heroic. You are the superior student. Before Izuku could respond, a cheerful voice cut in. Oh! It's you! The plain-looking one, it was Uraraka. She bounced over, her face bright. You were so amazing! That disassembly thing! Wow! And you got the highest score! I saw the boards. Suddenly Izuku was the center of attention. Several other students turned to look, whispering amongst themselves. That's the guy who took out the zero-pointer. I heard he just waved his hand and it fell apart. What kind of quirk even does that? Izuku felt a blush creep up his neck. The phoenix was quiet in his mind, but he could feel its detached curiosity, sensing the mixture of awe, jealousy, and intrigue from the other students. Then, a pair of crimson eyes locked onto him from across the room. Bakugo's feet slammed to the floor. He stood up, his hands shoved in his pockets, and stalked over to Izuku's desk. The whispers died down, the air grew thick with tension. Bakugo leaned down, his voice a low, menacing snarl that only Izuku could hear. Deku. You've been hiding this from me. All these years. Acting like some worthless, quirkless pebble. His hands began to spark, tiny pops of nitroglycerin. You're going to tell me what that damn power is. And then I'm going to blast you into next week to prove you're still nothing compared to me. The threat was visceral, but for the first time in his life, Izuku didn't flinch. He just met Bakugo's gaze, his own expression unreadable. He could feel the rage coming off Bakugo in waves, a desperate, insecure anger that was more pathetic than frightening. He could, with a thought, snuff out the sparks in Bakugo's palms. He could, with a gesture, hold him completely still. The sheer, terrifying gap in their power was an abyss between them. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave. A new voice, tired and utterly devoid of enthusiasm, cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see a man lying on the floor by the teacher's desk, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag like a giant, world-weary caterpillar. He took a long sip from a juice pouch before unzipping himself and standing up. He was tall and scruffy, with dark, unkempt hair, tired eyes, and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf wrapped around his neck. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, he said, his voice a dry monotone. That's not going to work. I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a set of blue gym uniforms. Put these on and meet me on the field. We're having a quirk apprehension test. A chorus of confused protests erupted. But what about orientation? Uraraka asked. And the welcoming ceremony? Yui isn't a normal school, Aizawa said, his back already to them. We don't have time for pointless ceremonies. You're here to become heroes. And your training starts now. The sun was bright on the training field. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in their gym uniforms, a nervous energy rippling through them. Aizawa stood before them, his expression as bored as ever. You've been taking standardized tests your whole lives, he announced. But you've never been allowed to use your quirks in physical exams. The ministry is run by bureaucrats who want everything neat and tidy. It's not rational. He singled out Bakugo. Bakugo. You got the second highest score on the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Do whatever you want as long as you stay in the circle. Bakugo grinned, a feral, excited expression. He stretched his arm back, and with a thunderous explosion, launched the ball into the sky. Die! He screamed, the word more a battle cry than a statement. A few students' sweat dropped. Die! The ball flew, leaving a smoke trail, and landed far in the distance. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters, he announced. Know your own maximum. It's the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in excitement. 705 meters? That's insane. This is gonna be so much fun. We can use our quirks as much as we want. Aizawa's expression soured. A dark, almost predatory grin spread across his face. Fun? You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun times? His eyes narrowed. Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have 0 potential and will be expelled. Immediately. Panic. The mood shifted from excitement to dead seriousness in a heartbeat. This was real. Their dream could end before it even began. The tests began. The 50-meter dash, the standing long jump, the grip strength test. In each one, Izuku performed adequately. He didn't use his power. He didn't need to. He had spent the last 10 months training his body alongside his mind with Tashinori, and while he wasn't a top athlete, he was no longer the weakling he had been. He was average. Perfectly, wonderfully, terrifyingly average. He could feel Aizawa's eyes on him, a probing, analytical gaze. He knew the teacher was watching him, the mysterious top scorer, waiting for him to reveal his hand. He saw the others use their quirks in creative ways. Ida's engines made him a blur in the dash. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless to improve her jump. Oyama's naval laser propelled him backward. It was a dazzling display of power and ingenuity. And then came the ball throw. It was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling mundane in his palm. The class watched with bated breath. This was it. The moment the number 1 student would finally show them what he could do. He took a deep breath and prepared to throw, planning to give the ball a small, telekinetic nudge. Nothing too flashy, just enough to get a good score. As he began his wind-up, he felt a sudden, strange emptiness. The warmth in his bones vanished. The constant, low hum of the phoenix in his mind went silent. The psychic senses that had become a part of his world, the ambient emotions of his classmates, the distant hum of the city, all of it winked out of existence. For the first time in 10 months, he was completely, utterly alone in his own head. He was just Izuku Midoriya. Quirkless, he threw the ball. It landed with a pathetic thud about 46 meters away. Silence. Then, a few confused whispers. Bakugo looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. I erased your quirk. Aizawa's dry voice cut through the confusion. His dark hair was floating around his head, and his eyes were glowing a faint, menacing red. The capture weapon around his neck was writhing like snakes. That entrance exam was not rational. A person with a power like yours, who can't control it, is a liability. You would be a menace, a disaster waiting to happen in the field. Izuku stared at him, his mind reeling. He erased it? But that was impossible. His ability. The Phoenix's voice suddenly returned, no longer a hum but a sharp, analytical spike in his consciousness as Aizawa blinked and his hair fell. It does not target the energy. It targets the biological factor that allows for its expression. The quirk factor. It severs the connection between the user's body and their power. Izuku looked at Aizawa with new understanding. Eraserhead. His quirk was erasure. But we are not a quirk, the Phoenix stated, a hint of something like cosmic pride in its voice. We are not biological. We are a fundamental force bonded to your consciousness. He tried to turn off a light switch, but we are not connected to the house's power grid. He cannot erase what is not a quirk. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. I've returned your power. Try it again. And this time, don't hold back. Show me what you can do. Show me if you have any potential at all. Izuku stepped back into the circle. The eyes of his classmates were burning into him. Bakugo looked ready to kill him. Aizawa was watching, his gaze sharp and critical. He had a choice. He could give the ball a small nudge, get a decent score, and try to blend in. Or he could follow All Might's advice. He could show them what he was, and in doing so, begin the long, terrifying process of learning to control it. He took a deep breath, his focus absolute. He wasn't throwing a ball. He was making a statement. He wound up, his motions smooth and practiced. As his arm came forward, he didn't just nudge the ball. He connected with it on a fundamental level. He didn't push it. He willed it to go. He poured a sliver of the Phoenix's true, cosmic power into that simple command. For a moment, as he released the ball, a flicker of golden light flared in his eyes. The ball shot from his hand. It didn't arc. It didn't fly. It simply vanished. There was no sonic boom, no trail of smoke. One moment it was in his hand, the next it was gone, propelled by a telekinetic force that bordered on a localized warp in spacetime. The class was silent, stunned. They all stared at the empty sky where the ball had been. Aizawa's handheld device beeped. He looked down at it. His eyes, normally half-lidded with boredom, went wide. He held it up for the class to see. On the screen was not a number, but a symbol, an infinity symbol. Infinity. The silence on the field was now absolute, thick with disbelief and awe. Bakugo's jaw was hanging open, his mind refusing to process what he had just seen. Uraraka and Ida stared, dumbfounded. The other students looked at Izuku as if he were an alien who had just landed. Aizawa lowered the device, his expression unreadable. But Izuku could feel it. He could feel the shock, the confusion, and a dawning, deep-seated apprehension from his teacher. This wasn't a power that fit into any known category. It didn't follow the rules. He turned to face his teacher, his heart pounding but his voice steady. He remembered the cover story he and Toshinori had painstakingly crafted. Vague, but not a lie. You were right, Sensei, Izuku said, his voice carrying in the silent air. You tried to erase my power. He looked Aizawa directly in the eye. But you can't. Aizawa's gaze sharpened. Why not? Izuku took a deep breath. Because it's not a quirk. The statement hung in the air, a quiet bombshell that shattered every preconceived notion in the field. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple, terrifying fact. Aizawa, the hero whose entire fighting style was predicated on his ability to nullify the powers of others, had just encountered an opponent he couldn't switch off. He had something in his class that was completely, fundamentally outside the known rules of their world. And in that moment, Shota Aizawa realized that the problem child of his class was not the explosive one, nor the arrogant one, but the quiet, green-haired boy who held the power of a star in his hands and had just thrown a baseball into orbit. The most rational thing to do would be to expel him. But Nisa's orders had been clear: challenge him, observe him. Do not, under any circumstances, let him leave UA. Aizawa now understood why. This wasn't just about training a hero. This was about containing a god. Deep beneath the bustling streets of Kamino Ward, in a place that did not exist on any map, a man sat on a throne of life support machinery. He was a creature of scar tissue and shadow, his face a ruin hidden behind a skull-like respirator, a network of tubes coiling from his body like metallic entrails. He was a phantom, a myth whispered by underworld figures and terrified heroes. He was all for one, and he was bored. His world was a symphony of stolen senses. He could see through the eyes of a petty thief in Fukuoka, taste the salt on the air through a dockworker in Osaka, and feel the vibrations of the subway through the quirk of a homeless man in Tokyo. His network was vast, his consciousness a sprawling web stretched across the nation. He was everywhere and nowhere, a king ruling a hidden empire of crime and fear from a sterile, subterranean tomb. For decades, his existence had been defined by a single, all-consuming goal: the acquisition of one for all. It was more than a powerful quirk. It was a symbol, a legacy, a personal insult. It was the one thing his brother had created that he could not take, the one power that had been passed down through generations of fools, culminating in the grinning, insufferable buffoon known as All Might. His plans were patient, intricate things, machinations decades in the making. The creation of the Nomu, the grooming of Tamura Shigaraki. It was all a prelude to the final act, the day he would finally crush the symbol of peace and take back the power that, by rights of strength, should have been his from the very beginning. But today, his boredom was interrupted. It began as a subtle anomaly, a flicker in the vast sensory tapestry he commanded. It was not a sight or a sound, but a feeling, a ripple in the very fabric of reality. He had been passively observing the UA entrance exam through the eyes of a dozen informants and technologically gifted villains he had placed in the area. It was a yearly ritual, a way to scout new talent, to gauge the strength of the next generation of heroes he would eventually have to kill. He watched Bakugo's explosive performance with a detached amusement. A powerful quirk, but crude, artless. He saw the potential in others, cataloging their abilities with the cold, discerning eye of a collector. It was all so predictable. So mundane. Then, the zero-pointer was deployed. He felt the ripple of panic through the crowd, the flight of the examinees. And he felt one small, insignificant life force turn and run back into the danger. A foolish, sentimental act. And then the world, his finely tuned network of stolen senses, screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure wave of pure, untamed energy that washed over the entire prefecture. It was not like a quirk activation, which was a localized, biological event. This was different. This was like the sun had blinked. The informants he had watching the exam had their surveillance equipment fizzle and die. The villains with sensory quirks in a 10-mile radius crumpled to the ground, clutching their heads, their abilities going haywire. For a split second, All for One's own vast network of stolen senses was flooded with static, a roaring white noise that felt ancient and impossibly vast. He recoiled, not in pain, but in sheer, profound shock. What was that? It was not an explosion. It was not an electromagnetic pulse. It felt cosmic, primordial. Like the universe itself had flexed a muscle. He immediately focused his resources. He called upon a villain with a technopathy quirk, forcing him to piece together the corrupted data from UA's servers. He activated sleeper agents within the Hero Public Safety Commission. He needed to know what had happened. He needed to see the source of that power. When the footage finally materialized, projected on the large screen that dominated his chamber, he understood. And his boredom was replaced by an electrifying, covetous hunger he had not felt in over a century. He saw the boy. Small, plain, with a shock of green hair. He saw him disassemble the colossal robot not with force, but with a quiet, terrifying grace. He saw the spectral, fiery wings flare behind him, a symbol of power so profound it made every quirk he had ever stolen seem like a parlor trick. This was not a quirk. All for One knew quirks. He had stolen thousands of them. He understood their mechanics, their limitations, their biological anchors. He could feel them, taste them, categorize them. They were tools, extensions of the human body and will. What he was watching was something else entirely. This was not a tool. This was the hand of a god. The boy wasn't just manipulating energy. He was commanding the very laws of physics. The power didn't emanate from him. It seemed to flow through him, as if he were a conduit for something far older and greater. Doctor, All for One spoke, his voice a synthesized rasp that echoed in the sterile chamber. Play it again. Isolate the energy signature. His personal physician and scientist, the squat, goggle-wearing Kyudai Garaki, scurried to the console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The readings are impossible, master, the doctor stammered, his usual clinical composure gone. The energy output is unquantifiable. It doesn't match any known energy source. It has the properties of psionic energy, thermal energy, and kinetic energy simultaneously, yet it leaves behind no residual radiation. It's as if reality itself was briefly rewritten in that localized area. All for One stared at the image of the boy, Izuka Midoriya. He saw the raw power, but he also saw the fear in the boy's own eyes, the exhaustion as he collapsed. The power was untamed. The vessel was fragile, new to his gift. A slow, terrible smile spread across All for One's ruined face. The acquisition of One for All, the culmination of his life's work, suddenly seemed like a secondary objective. A quaint hobby. One for All was a powerful quirk, a torch passed from one fool to the next. But this was the fire from which all torches were lit. To possess a power like that. To not just steal quirks, but to have the ability to unmake matter, to reshape reality with a thought. It would be the ultimate ascension. He would not just be a king of the underworld. He would be a god, Tamura, all for one said, his voice laced with a new, chilling excitement. A portal of swirling purple-black mist opened in the chamber, and from it stepped Tamura Shigaraki. The young man was hunched over, his pale blue hair obscuring his face, his hands scratching agitatedly at his neck. He was a creature of pure, destructive impulse, a child in a man's body, obsessed with games and spite. "What is it, master?" Shigaraki rasped, his red eyes glaring from beneath his hair. "Is it time? Is it time to kill All Might?" "Patience, Tamura," all for one said, his tone gentle, paternal. He gestured a scarred, tube-ridden hand toward the screen, which was now frozen on a close-up of Izuku's determined face. "I have a new, side quest for you. A new event boss has appeared on the map." Shigaraki looked at the screen, his expression twisting into a sneer of contempt. "Him? He's just another Yui brat. Some hero in training NPC. Why are we wasting time on him? He is not an NPC, Tamura," all for one corrected, his voice firm. "He is the key to the ultimate cheat code. The power this boy wields is significant. More significant than one for all." Shigaraki stopped scratching. He stared at his master, then back at the screen, a look of disbelief and outrage on his face. "More than All Might's power? That's impossible. Nothing is stronger than that final boss." His entire worldview, the game he had constructed in his mind with All Might as the ultimate objective, was being challenged. "Watch," all for one commanded. He replayed the footage of the zero-pointer's disassembly. Shigaraki watched, his petulant anger slowly giving way to a stunned, grudging silence. His quirk, Decay, could destroy anything he touched. It was a power of absolute destruction. But this was different. This was control. It was effortless. It was clean. It was a power that made his own seem like a blunt, clumsy instrument. A flicker of jealousy, hot and bitter, sparked within him. "You see, Tamura," all for one explained, "your decay is beautiful. It is absolute. But it is an ending. This power, it is the beginning and the end. It creates and it destroys. It rewrites the rules of the game itself." He turned his full, unseen attention to his protege. "Your planned attack on the USJ facility at UA is still proceeding. Your objective to kill All Might remains. However, I am adding a new, primary objective to your mission." He pointed a finger at the frozen image of Izuku Midoriya. "Observe this boy. Test him. See the limits of his power. But your most important task, above all else, is to capture him. I want him alive. I want him intact." His voice dropped, the synthesized words filled with a chilling, possessive hunger. "Do not damage the vessel. The prize inside is far too valuable to risk." Shigaraki bristled, his hands immediately going to his neck, scratching furiously. "Capture him? Why? So you can take his quirk? What about me, master? You said I was the one who would destroy everything. You said I would be the next king." His voice was a high, whining screech of a child whose favorite toy was being threatened. "And you will be, all for one placated," his voice a soothing balm over Shigaraki's frayed nerves. "Think of it this way, Tamura. This boy holds a legendary weapon. A sword of immense power. Once I have taken it from him, I will have no more need for one for all. And I will give that sword to you. Imagine, Tamura. Your decay, combined with the power to reshape the world. You will be unstoppable. You will be the true final boss of this wretched society. No one will ever tell you game over again." The promise, as always, worked. The vision of ultimate power, of absolute victory, calmed Shigaraki's tantrum. The jealousy was still there, a hot coal in his gut, but it was now overlaid with a new, avaricious desire. If capturing this brat was the key to unlocking his own god-tier upgrade, then he would do it. "And the Nomu?" Shigaraki asked, a cruel grin spreading across his chapped lips. "It's ready. Designed to kill All Might. Bring the Nomu," all for one confirmed. "It will be the perfect tool to test the boy's limits. See how he reacts to a creature that cannot be reasoned with, that cannot be simply disassembled. See if his power has a breaking point. See what happens when a god is faced with a monster." Shigaraki's grin widened. "A monster? He liked that. He would unleash his monster, and he would see what this new player was really made of. And then, he would capture him and claim his prize. Kurogyri, Shigaraki rasped, turning to the misty, ethereal villain who served as his transport and advisor. Change the plan. We're going hero hunting. And we have a new rare mob to catch. Kurogyri bowed his misty head. As you wish, Tamura Shigaraki. As the warp gate closed, leaving him alone once more, All for One leaned back in his mechanical throne. The boredom was gone, replaced by a sense of exhilarating anticipation he hadn't felt since his prime. The world had just become infinitely more interesting. For decades, the fight had been between two opposing forces, one for all and all for one. A legacy of stockpiled power versus a legacy of stolen power. A battle between two sides of the same, mundane coin. Now, a new piece was on the board. A wild card. A force of nature that dwarfed them both. A cosmic power trapped in the most unlikely of vessels. He didn't know where it came from, or what it truly was, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had to have it. He looked at the screen, at the face of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who held the universe in his soul. A new game had begun, and All for One was determined to be the one who won. The future of the world, the fate of heroes and villains, all of it now revolved around this one, impossible child. And soon, very soon, he would be his. Days later, in the sprawling, dome-shaped unforeseen simulation joint facility at UA, Class 1A stood in awe. The professional hero 13 was explaining the purpose of the training center, a place designed to teach them how to use their quirks for rescue in various disaster scenarios. There was a shipwreck zone, a landslide zone, a fire zone, a hero's playground. Izuku stood with Uraraka and Ida, trying to absorb everything. He could feel the excitement from his classmates, but underneath it all, his own senses were on a low, constant alert. The phoenix within him was quiet, but watchful. Ever since the quirk apprehension test, it had adopted a more passive role, observing, learning, allowing Izuku to take the lead. But its presence was a constant reminder of the power he was trying to keep leashed. Aizawa was there, standing beside 13. All right, that's enough, he said, his voice cutting through 13's speech. Let's get started. But as he turned to the central plaza, he froze. His eyes widened. In the center of the plaza, below the main staircase, the air began to shimmer and distort. A small, black-purple speck appeared, then rapidly expanded, swirling into a vortex of dark mist. It was the same phenomenon Izuku had seen in his mind when All for One had summoned his apprentice. Whoa, they even have fake villains! Kirishima said, a wide grin on his face. Aizawa's voice was deadly serious. Those are not fake. His hair began to float, his eyes glowing red. 13. Protect the students. Kaminari, try to contact the school. From the swirling portal, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. Low-level thugs, street-level villains, a motley, pathetic army of criminals. And at their head stood two figures. The first was a man made of purple-black mist, wearing a sharp suit, his eyes two glowing yellow slits. Kurogyri. The second was Tamura Shigaraki. He was even more unsettling in person, with disembodied hands gripping his arms, his neck, and covering his face. He surveyed the students with a dismissive, predatory gaze, scratching his neck with a manic energy. So many heroes, Shigaraki rasped, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and contempt. And I was told All Might would be here. He must have taken a day off. How disappointing. A change in the schedule. His gaze swept over the students, lingering on a few before finally locking onto Izuku. A slow, chilling grin spread across his face, visible even around the hand obscuring it. No matter, he said, his eyes fixed on Izuku with a terrifying, singular focus. The main quest objective is still here.